I'm Patrick Watson, I'm an astrologer, and today we're going to be talking about the 10 different types of Sagittarius. So, you were born with the Sun in Sagittarius, the diurnal fire sign of Jupiter, the sign of the professor, the philosopher, the sage. They're jolly, generous, and judgy, worldly, wondering, and wise, hearty, humorous, holier than thou, and sometimes they can be kinda know-it-alls. So of course the Sun is in Sagittarius for most of December, which is a fun and happy time, the holiday season, when everyone overdoes it on food, on spending on gifts and decorations, etc. And like Jupiter, there is another gift-dispensing benevolent red giant who can be seen everywhere when the Sun is in Sagittarius. Basically our modern Jupiter, Santa Claus. It's the season of peace on earth and goodwill to all. Beethoven was a Sagittarius, and one of the pieces he was most famous for writing is the so-called Ode to Joy, the final movement of his Ninth Symphony, which he wrote to represent the universal brotherhood of mankind. And there's nothing more Sagittarian than that. Sagittarians tend to see life as a grand adventure, whether they're an explorer, a professor, or just a bro for whom the party never ends. The greatest thing about Sagittarius is also its downfall. They overdo everything. Sagittarius is a sign about going places, and would you know it, the part of the body Sagittarius is associated with is the glutes and the legs, which transport you from A to B. Not every person with the Sun in Sagittarius is the same, however, and one way we can differentiate between different types is by considering what other planets aspect the Sun in Sagittarius. Today we're just focusing on the conjunction, which is where two celestial bodies are close to the same degree of longitude. Different planets conjunct the Sun in Sagittarius equals a different type of Sagittarius. Sun conjunct Moon in Sagittarius. Someone with the Sun conjunct the Moon in Sagittarius is going to be a Sagittarius on the inside and the outside. Dan Bilzerian was born the day of a new moon in Sagittarius, and he's this poker player who became internet famous when he was spotted in the background of a live poker event with a woman stroking his beard. He's been called the King of Instagram, with an account that's followed by millions. His photos on Instagram cast himself as a veritable black-bearded Zeus, surrounded by an obscene amount of wealth, pictured in beautiful and exotic locations with guns, cars, sports, animals, and seemingly constantly surrounded by scantily clad beautiful women used as props and occasionally depicted as property. Just this total gaudy embodiment of excess, the realm of Jupiter and Sagittarius. Sort of like a poor man's idea of what a rich man is like. And while his life looks like a lot of fun, you can only imagine a person like that. It sounds like they'd be kind of a douchebag as well. And, well, you'd be right. Sun conjunct Mercury in Sagittarius. Mercury is the thinker, the speaker, the comedian, and Jon Stewart was born with the Sun conjunct Mercury in Sagittarius, and he is the very embodiment of this aspect. He was the former host of The Daily Show, a wise comedian who delivered jokes about the news, or was he reporting the news with jokes? Just as Sagittarius beckons us to aim ever higher, Jon Stewart's mercurial insight into politics and media was as enlightening as it was hilarious, and I still miss him being at that desk each night. And that is Sun conjunct Mercury in Sagittarius. Sun conjunct Venus in Sagittarius. Venus is often associated with beauty, harmony, and the arts. Jimi Hendrix was born with the Sun conjunct Venus in Sagittarius, and yeah, he often tops the list in discussions of the best guitarists of all time, so he certainly checks off a few boxes right off the top, but his particular musical style was very Sagittarian. After all, it wasn't merely his music you were listening to, but an experience you participated in, a psychedelic, funky odyssey. That's why he called his first band the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Yeah. Also, true to Jupiter and Sagittarius' associations with travel and foreign lands, he only found success, favor, and romance by leaving his native Seattle for an exotic place called London. So, yeah, excuse him while he kisses the sky. Sun conjunct Mars in Sagittarius. Mars is aggression and conflict, and someone with the Sun conjunct Mars in Sagittarius is going to have the potential to be fiery, caustic, and belligerent about their beliefs. The right-wing polemicist Ann Coulter was born with the Sun conjunct Mars in Sagittarius, and she definitely represents some of the more negative connotations for Sagittarius, having extreme and terrible opinions on just about everything, which she is unafraid to spew freely. A quote of hers which sums her up in my mind is this: "I'm a Christian first and a mean-spirited, bigoted conservative second, and don't you ever forget it." She was featured on the roast of Rob Lowe on Comedy Central at her Mars return in 2016, and the most vicious comedic insults came at her expense, even though it wasn't even her roast. Some of the jokes were so brutal I almost felt sorry for her, until I didn't. Sun conjunct Jupiter in Sagittarius. Jupiter is at home in Sagittarius. The planet of jollity, wisdom, and beneficence is in a sign associated with a lot of the same things. Someone with the Sun conjunct Jupiter in Sagittarius is going to be someone who seems to have a Midas touch, adorned by honors and awards, someone who's trusted, someone who tries to make things bigger and better. Jim Kim was born with the Sun conjunct Jupiter in Sagittarius, and he is currently the president of the World Bank. Get a load of this guy's background. You just kind of have to hear it in order to sort of get the idea. This guy was a valedictorian and president of his high school class. He graduated from Brown with honors. He got his MD and his PhD at Harvard. Then he started a group called Partners in Health, which succeeded in bringing down the cost of medicine and treated millions of patients in South America. And it was so successful, he was brought onto the leadership team at the World Health Organization. And this led to his stints as a professor at Harvard University, a president of Dartmouth College, and then he was elected as president of the World Bank. And he was the first president from the field of medicine rather than business or politics. And he brought this focus to the health issues of developing countries. So, yeah, people who reach these echelons of power tend to have something good going on with Jupiter, and that just seems to be the case for Mr. Kim as well, with the Sun conjunct Jupiter in Sagittarius. Sun conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius. Someone with the Sun conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius is going to be someone who is melancholic, critical, and skeptical in the Sagittarian realms of knowledge, philosophy, culture, society, politics, etc. Noam Chomsky was born with the Sun conjunct Saturn in Sagittarius, and he is one of the most widely cited scholars in history and widely known as a staunch critic of American foreign policy, neoconservatism, neoliberalism, capitalism, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the media, etc. He's especially famous for his landmark contribution to linguistics when he published his book Syntactic Structures, which he did at his first Saturn return in Sagittarius. And by the time of his next Saturn return in 1987, he was a globally recognized political thinker, and at that return, he published Manufacturing Consent, the Political Economy of the Mass Media. And in his most recent Saturn return, he released a documentary called Requiem for the American Dream. So you can see how this studiousness, seriousness, and pessimism of Saturn shines through in his academic, intellectual, and political pursuits in the Sagittarian realms. Sun conjunct Uranus in Sagittarius. Uranus is a planet of chaos, instability, and originality. Let's take Nicki Minaj, for example. She was born with the Sun conjunct Uranus in Sagittarius, and she's a rapper who has this very unusual and very unique rapping style, where she switches between different accents and personalities, and she can often be seen in extremely colorful, wacky, and attention-getting outfits. She also has this classic Sagittarian generosity. One night she randomly got on Twitter and started offering to pay the tuition bills for her fans. She actually did it. People actually got their tuition bills paid off by Nicki Minaj on Twitter. And we did say Sagittarius rules the glutes and the legs, and she's also pretty well known for her, Sagittarian attributes. Now, Nicki Minaj is just one of these pop stars who's doing this kind of crazy, wacky, colorful outfits thing. Katy Perry was also big on doing this, and she was born with Venus conjunct Uranus in Sagittarius. Lady Gaga is also famous for her crazy outfits, and she was born with Venus trine Uranus in Sagittarius. So, yeah, there's something about Uranus in Sagittarius where this idea of projecting fun and color is taken to this crazy extreme. Sun conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius. Neptune is the planet of fantasies and illusions. The musician Imogen Heap was born with the Sun conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius, and her music is pop, infused with elements of electronic and ambient sounds, which gives her work an ethereal, magical, otherworldly, dreamy sound, which induces the listener into an addictingly joyful, peaceful space. Very Neptune and Sagittarius-ish. But here's what makes her work so very Sagittarian. For example, songs from her album Sparks were compiled from audio fragments her fans sent in from all over the world, and she composed the songs while traveling across the world herself, in India, and China, Bhutan, and other places. So that's some of Jupiter's expansiveness ruling Sagittarius, and as well as Neptune's boundlessness between international borders. Speaking of Neptune and boundlessness, she has also pioneered the use of Mimu gloves, which allow someone to compose and perform music through movement and gestures, seemingly creating music out of thin air. The themes of her songs are hard to pin down and subject to interpretation, but she sometimes evokes big picture, far out, philosophical and spiritual and sci-fi concepts. She's a long way from just writing love songs, basically. Also, remember how Sagittarius rules the legs? She even worked on an interactive jogging app, which creates an ambient soundtrack based on the sounds around you when you run, with your legs. So yeah, sometimes the Sagittarius legs things come really, really literally. So yeah, if you haven't checked out her music, Imogen Heap is a pretty amazing example of a Sun conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius. Sun conjunct Pluto in Sagittarius. Pluto is associated with extremes, transformations, titanic fundamental forces, etc. The most recent transit for Pluto in Sagittarius, beginning in 1995, coincided with the explosion of the internet and the consolidation of all human knowledge into digital realms. At the same time, it was a time when religiously motivated terrorism and discrimination hit a new peak, especially when Saturn opposed Pluto in Sagittarius over the course of the 9/11 attacks and everything that happened afterward. Unfortunately, the most current generation of Sagittarians with Pluto and Sagittarius are still too young to use as examples. However, there is another example from a long, long time ago. The Roman Emperor Nero was born with the Sun conjunct Pluto in Sagittarius, and his reign is strongly associated with two very Plutonian Sagittarian keywords, tyranny and extravagance. He's known for being a sadistic and brutal dictator, killing most of his own family, including his mother and even his pregnant wife, and he had Christians fed to lions, crucified, and burned alive. On the other hand, he did also make big investments in rebuilding Rome to ease the economic troubles of the people after the Great Fire of Rome kind of burned everything. And of course, that was a fire that he kind of started so he could build a giant extension onto his palace. So, yeah. He was a guy who was extremely vulnerable to flattery. He loved expanding real estate, liked to scapegoat religious minorities, had a complicated relationship with women, to put it lightly, and found fascism to be more straightforward than democracy. That doesn't sound like anyone we know. Sun conjunct multiple planets in Sagittarius. Sometimes when multiple planets are conjunct together, you have to combine their interpretations. For example, Chelsea Manning was born with the Sun conjunct Mercury, Saturn, and Uranus in Sagittarius. Chelsea Manning, if you didn't know, was a whistleblower who exposed crimes of the military by leaking sensitive military and diplomatic files to WikiLeaks, which published them, for which he was court-martialed and sentenced to decades in prison until President Obama commuted a sentence at the end of his second term. Even just that description ties together several threads of a Sun, Mercury, Saturn, Uranus conjunction. Someone who risks chaos in their freedoms, someone who experiences hard consequences for their speech and communications, etc. In my previous video about the 10 different types of Aries, I noted that another whistleblower, Daniel Ellsberg, was also born with the Sun conjunct Uranus, and it's very Uranus-like to take a risk like revealing state secrets for the greater good. And in typical Sagittarius fashion, Chelsea Manning said she did it because if people knew the truth, they wouldn't choose war. Adorable. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share it with your Sagittarius friends, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you don't miss my next video by subscribing to my YouTube channel, and if you're super awesome, help me keep these videos coming by supporting me on Patreon, even if it's just $1. I really appreciate it. And to all Suns and Sagittarius out there this month, happy birthday. See you next time. I wore this shirt. It says Believe, and there's a Santa cat. I just thought it was a good Sagittarius shirt to wear, and yeah.